Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Selenium Tech Automation. So today I am going to discuss about what is a defect and what is a bug. So what is the difference between defect and bug, and also what is the difference between defect severity and defect priority, and what is a reproducible defect. So along with these topics, so we are going to some discussion about so what is a defect life cycle. So this is very important question, so which are asking by interviewers when you are giving interview, right? So let's get started with today's topics. So the first one is here, what is a defect? As we know already, suppose if I am trying to log into some application, so there I am not able to enter my username with some particular characters, okay? So then as per the requirements, that characters should work fine when you entered from your keyboard, right? So when you entered, it is not entering, it is not allowing that character inside the text field. So during this time we can treat it as a defect. And also once if you create any login with some user, so you will see some login successfully. So during sometimes what will happen, this login successfully message is not appearing on the UI part after your login, right? So we can consider this one also a defect, which means the variation between the actual result and expected results known as a defect, right? What is a defect? The variation between the actual result and expected results known as a defect, okay? For example, if a developer finds an issue, okay, for example, if a developer finds an issue and corrects it by himself in the development phase, then it is called a defect, okay? If a developer finds an issue and corrects it by himself in the development phase, then we can call it as a defect. Then what is a bug? Here there are there are difference between what is a bug and what is a defect, okay? Previously we discussed about what is defect, and now what is a bug. If a tester find any mismatch in the application in testing phase, then we can call it as a bug, right? As a testers, if we find any mismatching in the application in testing phase, okay, then we can consider it as a bug, okay? What is the difference between defect and bug? Okay, the variation between the actual result and expected results known as defect. If a developer finds an issue and corrects it by himself in the development phase, then we can call it as a defect. Whereas it comes to what is a bug means, as an automation tester, as a manual tester, as a tester, if we found any mismatch in the application in testing phase, if I found any mismatching in the application in testing phase, then we can call it as a bug, right? So I think you cleared on these two concepts, like what is a defect and what is a bug. An interviewer, if he will ask you about what's the difference between defect and bug, you can explain in this way: what is a defect and what is a bug. What is a defect? Defect will be found under development phase, whereas bug will be found under testing phase, okay? So then here also, what is a reproducible defect? The other one is, what is a reproducible defect? If a defect is occurring every time, then it is called a reproducible defect. A defect is occurring every time, then we can call it as a reproducible defect. And also there will be some defect severity and defect priority. For example, under defect severity, what is called defect severity here? Impact of the defect, or how seriously the defect is called as defect severity, okay? Here impact of the defect or how serious the defect is called as defect severity, okay? Severity means, it means severity here means it is not allowing us for further process. For example, if I want to log into some application, so due to some issues I am not able to log into my application after entering the username and password. So this is, we can consider it as a severity, okay? Defect severity. So under this defect severity we can have various levels. The first one is very high severity, and the second one is high severity, the third one is medium severity, the fourth one is low severity, okay? Impact of the defect or how serious the defect is called as a severity. We can consider here the severity with an example, like if user is not allowing into that login application, after doing his login he is not able to log in to his application, so then we can consider it as an severity. So under severity there are some levels. The first one is very high severity, the second one is high severity, the third one is medium severity, and the fourth one is low severity. So we have to note one thing here: tester is the right person to decide defect severity, because tester knows the requirements very well, Okay, this is the one point we have to remember. The note here is tester is the right person to decide defect severity because tester knows the application very well and also requirements also. Okay, as a tester we are the right persons to decide defect severity because tester knows the requirements very well and also tester knows the application flow very well, right? So when it comes to defect priority, the order in which defects to be resolved is called as defect priority. The order in which defects to be resolved is called as defect priority. So here also we can have the same levels how we can found for defect severity, how we can discuss about defect severity levels, right? So inside this defect priority levels, so what are all the defect priority levels we can have? Here also very high, that is P0. High means P1 priority, P2 means medium priority and P3 means low priority. Okay, defect priority means the order in which the defects to be resolved is called as defect priority. Whereas it comes to the levels, whereas it comes to the defect priorities, we can also have several priorities. The first one is very high priority, that is P0. After that high priority, that is P1. After that medium priority, that is P2, and the last one is low priority, that is P3. Okay, defect priority decided by developers because developers are going to resolve the issues. Okay, we have one note here, defect priority decided by the developers because developers are going to resolve these issues. Okay, defect priority decided by developer because developer is going to resolve the issues. Okay, there is one more note, defect severity versus defect priority. Okay, in interviewer, if interviewer will ask you about defect severity versus defect priority, means we have to tell in this way. For example, in most of the cases defect severity and defect priority are directly proportional to each other. Okay, in most of the cases defect severity and defect priority are directly proportional to each other. High severity defect is high priority to resolve. Okay, high severity defects high severity defects high severity defects having high priority to resolve. Low severity defect is low priority to resolve. Means defect severity and defect priority both are directly proportional to each other. If any one of the defect having the high severity, then we have to, developer categorize it as a high priority while doing the resolving, okay, the issue. So the next one is here, so defect status, right? Defect status, it indicates the current status of the defect in development process. Okay, defect status means after if you found any defect and reported to developer, he will add that status like defect status, which means it indicates the current status of the defect in development process, whether the developer accepted your defect or he rejected your defect or still he is working on the defect, which means hold. Okay, there are few statuses where we have to mention for the defect which is mentioning by developer. Okay, let us continue with our the most important question, that is defect life cycle. As you can see here, the first one is, as a tester, if we found any bug, so we are going to report to the developer, right? So the first thing here is what we have to do, if we found a defect, okay, as a tester, if we find a defect, we have to raise that in any one of the tool which are using by your company, that is one is ALM or that is Jira or one more is Bugzilla. Okay, these are the three tools where we are going to deal with these defects or test managements, and also it is very useful to raise our defects, these tools. Okay, the first step here is, as a tester, if we find any defect, okay, as a tester, if we find any defect, so we are going to raise it inside that Jira or ALM or Bugzilla. So when you raised for the first time, that status will be in the new state. You can see here the status will be in the new state. Okay, as a tester, if we find any defect, that first status will be new. So after that we are going to report to the respective developer. Once if we find any defect, that status will be new. So once if we make it as a new, so then we are going to report the defect to the developer. Okay, then we are going to report that to developer. So then developer will start to verify and analyze the defect which we reported. Okay, the developer will verify and analyze the defect which we reported, and he will start working on that one. So once that is done, so verify or analyze here, after his developer will verify and analyze, he will open if the defect is valid. If the defect is valid, he will change that status to open on his environment. Okay, if that what we raised a defect, if that is valid, so then developer is going to change the status to open. Okay, once if the developer started working on that one, and once if he found any solution for that one, he is going to change the status to fixed. Okay, then the developer is going to change the status to be fixed, because the defect is already valid defect. After that, developer started analyzing on the defect and he made some workaround. So once if it is working fine, then he made that status to he will change that status to fixed. Okay, so once this defect got fixed, so then he will move that into modified build. Okay, move that into modified build. So then he will create some new build, where in that build what we raised the defect which is working properly fine in that particular build, in that particular new build. Okay, once the developer fixes that issue, he will move the status to fix. Once that is done, he will deploy one more build, so where the defect is working fine. Okay, where the issue got resolved, so then he is going to fix that defect in that particular modified build. So once the developer fixed the defect, okay, once the developer fixed the defect, it is applicable for retesting. Okay, and developer will release this defect for retesting. Once if we started to testing on that particular defect, if it is working fine, so then the status will become close. Okay, as a tester, once that defect is working fine, when that defect is working fine, then the status of the defect will become close. Okay, the status will become close. So once if it is not working properly fine after the retesting, so then again we are going to reopen that same defect. Okay, once if that defect is not working and after the retesting, so then we are going to reopen it again, and we are going to assign back it to developer only. Here you can see, once the defect got fixed, it is ready for retesting. After retesting, if it is working fine, so the status will become to close. After retesting, if it is not working fine, so then we are going to again reopen the defect and assigning back it to the respective developer. Okay, so then after again he started to working on that one. So if the defect is invalid, okay, after that if the defect is invalid, there are three cases we need to remember here. If the defect is valid, then these are all the steps we are going to follow. As a developer, we will follow all these steps. So if the defect is invalid, means if the what we raised the defect which is working fine on his environment and also in testing environment, then he is going to reject that defect what we raised. So once if the defect is not clear, if you are not clear about the defect, then the developer will put that defect on hold. Okay, when the defect is not clear, if we are not mentioning properly, so if the developer is not understanding it properly, so then he needs to be put inside, in hold status. Okay, the next one is if defect is already open. For example, I have opened a defect for where I am not able to enter my username inside one text field of that login button, login page. Okay, which we already raised for defect. So again we are creating one more defect for the same functionality. So then the developer will consider it as duplicate status. Okay, then the developer will consider it as duplicate, because the defect is already open. If the defect is already open, so then he is not going to work on that defect one more time. Okay, so this is how this defect life cycle will going on. So first, as a tester, we need to find some defect. So after finding that defect, so we have to open that status as new. Once that is done, so we are going to report to the developer. So once the developer will start to analyze or verify the developer is valid or invalid, or the defect is not clear, or if the defect is already open, first developer needs to be verify and analyze. If the defect is valid, then he will change the status to open. After doing some workaround, he is going to fix that issue. Once that issue got fixed, he deploy one more new build where the defect is fixed. So once that is done, that is ready for retesting. After retesting, if the defect is resolved, so we can change its status to close. So if it is not working properly fine after retesting, so then again we can reopen and assign back it to again the same developer. Okay, so these are all the phases we have to remember when we are working as an automation tester or manual tester. Okay, so and also we can discuss about few examples for high priority and high severity. For example, for high priority and high severity, so I will give you some example. For example, there is a submit button which is not working on a login page, and customers are unable to log in with their accounts into that particular application. We can consider it as a high priority and high severity, because priority and severity both are directly proportional to each other. If there is any high severity defect, so then developer have to make that as high priority level. Okay, and also low priority and high severity. There is one more example for low priority and high severity. What is the example? For example, crashing in some functionality which is going to deliver after couple of releases. Okay, after couple of releases, so there is some application is crashing. So during this time, so we can treat it as low priority and high severity. Okay, with the help of high severity, developers are going to fix that issue in the upcoming releases. So then high priority and low severity, there is some spelling mistake. For example, login, LOGIN. Okay, in the UI it is coming as LOGGIINN. Okay, there are LOGGIINN. So we can consider it as high priority and low severity, because it is not impacting the application functionality. So that's why we can consider it as high priority and low severity. So in interviewer will ask you about tell some examples for bug severity and bug priority. If he will ask you like that, you can tell all these three. The first one is high priority and high severity, the next one is low priority and high severity, the last one is high priority and low severity. Okay, so far we discussed about what is a defect. The variation between the actual result and expected results is known as a defect. If a developer finds any issue and corrects it by himself in the development phase, then it is called as a defect. And the next one is what is a bug. If a tester find any mismatch in the application functionality during testing phase, then as a testers we can consider it as a bug. So after that, what is a reproducible defect? If a defect is occurring every time, then it is called as reproducible defect. Inside this defect, we can have some defect severity and defect priority. Defect severity means impact of the defect or how serious the defect is, called as defect severity. Here severity means it did not allow us for further process. Okay, severity is not allowing for further process, and we have to make some note here. Tester is the right person to decide defect severity, because tester knows the requirements very well. When it comes to defect priority, the order in which the defects to be resolved is called as defect priority. Here the defect priorities also have same levels. The first one is very high level, that is P0. The next one is high priority, that is P1. The next one is medium priority, that is P2. The last one is low priority, that is P3. And also we have to remember one more note here, that is defect severity versus defect priority. In most of the cases, defect severity and defect priority are directly proportional to each other, that is high severity defect is high priority to resolve, low severity defect is low priority to resolve. When it comes to defect life cycle, as a tester, if we found any defect, the initial state is status, it will be in new state. So once that is done, we are going to report it to the developer, so that then developer will analyze and verify whether the defect is invalid or a valid, or it is not clear, or if the defect is already open. If the defect is valid, so then he is going to change the status to open. After that, developer needs to make some workaround to fix that issue. Once he fixes that issue, again he will deploy some new build. So during that modified build, the defect is to be resolved, right? So to know that, as a tester we have to retest. If after retesting, if the defect is working fine as expected, so we are going to close that defect. If it is not working after retesting properly, so again we have to reopen that defect, and again we are going to assign back it to the respective developer. If the defect is invalid, what we raised the defect is invalid, so then the developer is going to reject the defect, because it is the invalid defect. If the defect is not clear on the requirements and what you find and updated to developer, he will keep the defect in hold, because the defect is not clear means you are not providing the proper information about the defect, so then developer is moving the status to hold. If the defect is already open, so then he will consider it as a duplicate, he is not going to do some workaround again. So in this way we have to explain in front of your interviewer if he will ask about all these kind of defect related concepts. So that's all it for now for this video. So please do a like for this video if you like this video and watch till the end. So we will continue with our next upcoming videos. So until then, take care everyone, have a nice day. Signing off, Selenium Tech Automation. We will connect with some other video. Thanks guys, thank you so much.